Thanks.
Hey, everybody. If you're catching this, you have joined us for episode 23. Crazy to think it's been 23 weeks now of the Keep It Simple podcast. We're so glad that you made it a point to join us today. This episode, I have my very dear friend, Alex Aken, on the show. Alex, as you're fixing to find out, is an incredible human being. I came to know Alex through Dani Aken, then Dani Brown, and through a lot of deep community, years and years of connection. And it was one of those moments. I met Alex and almost instantly just knew. You know how you meet those people and you encounter them and you're like, these are my people. Well, that was Alex. Alex has a call in his life to ministry, specifically in hospital chaplaincy. And so I'm sure we're going to get into that. We'll probably get into married life. We'll probably get into a lot on this episode. But without further ado, Alex, welcome to the Keep It Simple podcast.
Man, can't tell you how stoked I am to be with you, Ben.
Yeah. So just share a little bit about you. Like before we start in your story, you guys are in Nashville now?
Yep.
And so where is it that you're worshiping? What is it that you're doing with your days? Just kind of tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah. So Dani and I are almost 4 months married. Actually, we are 4 months married today.
No kidding.
Yep, October 20th.
Wow.
So that's funny how that worked out. But
yeah.
So we are living comfortably in our home that's up on a high hill that had some challenges when the snow rolled through and we had our ice. And being from Florida, I just never had to deal with these problems. But man, we're continuing to make memories and just settle down together. As you kind of mentioned, I work as a hospital chaplain at a Catholic hospital here in downtown Nashville. And so I've been working there, and Dani and I, we are part of a church community called Ethos Church, right in downtown Nashville. And so probably one of the best parts is our small group is a couple of we have 5 young couples that are all within a couple years of being married. And
wow.
So just spending time with friends and, settling into married life and enjoying the work that the Lord has.
Awesome, man. You mentioned your wedding and 4 months ago. I mean, this is a big statement, but that was without question one of the most beautiful weddings that I've ever been a part of or at or witnessed. That the two of you kept Christ at the center of that entire weekend. Just so cool and rare, beautiful. So you mentioned that you're from Florida, so you can start wherever. So this is not a polished show. We're open about that, right? So there's no editing, there's no show notes, there's no anything. You can just kind of do what you want, but start like wherever you choose. I would love to hear. So I know bits and pieces, right, from our time together and me just getting to know you and asking a blue billion questions because I think you're really cool. But so just kind of talk us through for folks through your story. Were you raised in a Christian home? How did your spirituality kind of start? Or what was the launch?
Definitely. So I was born and grew up right outside of Orlando, Florida, in a town called Windermere. It's like the connection. Kind of pause for a second. Can you see me?
Oh, yeah. Just keep on rocking. It'll be fine.
All right, right on.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about this. We're not polished. So, I mean, there's episodes where it will drop out and go to a black screen. It's fine. Just keep on rocking. That's the authenticity of it.
I like it.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I grew up in Windermere, Florida, right outside of Orlando. And
Hmm.
quite simply, I had a great childhood. Both my mom and my dad both loved me, and my older sister Ashley very
Yeah.
well. She's 2 years older than me, and she's one of my friends too.
Yeah.
Um, like my parents were both very supportive with us. So, for example, my dad, we were a really big sports family growing up,
Hmm.
and my dad was always one of our coaches.
Hmm.
He himself was a football player. He played kicker for University of Alabama and then
Wow.
transferred to University of Central Florida. Yep. So,
Wow.
and that's where he met my mom at UCF. And
Okay.
I think what was really cool is that it didn't matter if it was football, flag football, lacrosse, basketball, baseball, like you name whatever we played, he was
Hmm.
always wanting to be one of our coaches. Um, and then my mom, we went to pretty good public schools growing up, and she was always involved, whether it was like with PTA or substitute teaching, volunteering with stuff around campus. And I think I've especially been appreciating that later, just with Dani and I getting married recently, and how supportive they were
Hmm.
of Dani and I. Just like thinking of all the little ways that growing up, I might not have paid as much attention to it, but like my parents were like, of course, nobody's perfect and no family's perfect.
Sure.
But like my overall impression when I think of the home I grew up in was like they were so loving and supportive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just the,
But,
the snippet of time that I got with them at your wedding, I mean, top, top shelf, you know,
mm,
the, the depth and the sincerity and the care. Um,
yeah.
both in the interactions I had with them, the conversations I had with them at the rehearsal and the rehearsal dinner, and then throughout the weekend.
Yeah.
It's no wonder. Like, so when your family and Danny's family got together, and then so I'm hearing the Brown side of things, and you all get your families together for the first time, and the Browns come back and they're like, they're awesome. And I'm like, all right, yeah. So that all of that aligns well. So super
Yeah.
solid home life, parents that were very, very involved and engaged, and
Yeah.
yeah.
And what I think was really cool too is that we grew up in a pretty good neighborhood and had good family friends. Um, some of my good friends from school and that I played lacrosse or just played sports with,
Mhm.
their parents became some of my parents' best friends. And I know it might sound cheesy, but like that phrase, it takes a village to raise a child.
Yes.
I really feel like the family friends that we had growing up, like it was kind of like our little village.
Mhm.
That once again, I think more and more now when I look back on my life and growing up, it was so cool to just have people that it wasn't even anything out of the ordinary. It was just like good friends who did life together, and they were so
Mhm.
supportive of me too.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So growing up in there, where does your relationship with God enter the equation, right? So you raised super solid home, um, standout folks and parents, solid
Mhm.
community with other parents and kiddos.
Yeah.
Where and when, how, what was the equation like? Where did you meet Jesus?
Man, so with all of the cool things and great things that came with my childhood, something that I really struggled with growing up was anxiety and panic attacks.
Okay.
So when I was like 5 going on 6 years old, first day of kindergarten, nothing out of the ordinary. Mom took me to school and was going to drop me off, and we were lined up outside of our teacher's classroom waiting for her to welcome us in. Miss Surin comes out and warmly invites us in and says hello. And my mom starts to say goodbye to me, and I start to panic. And like separation anxiety is pretty normal for
Yeah.
little kids, but they eventually grow out of it. But for me, that was the beginning of some severe struggles with anxiety,
Wow.
um, to where every year at the start of the school year, it would take me a few weeks to a month to get settled in. But the problem was is that it became such a pattern for me that not only would I be getting anxious at the beginning of the year, but like halfway through the year or in the summertime, I'm already getting anxious about the
Mm-hmm.
upcoming year.
Mm-hmm.
And so anxiety was just something that plagued me, and then it led me to just being generally anxious about a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the funny thing is that I think this played a big role in my faith because when, like, as a little kid growing up, I think I was always kind of sensitive to spiritual things, and I'll get into that in a second. But
Mm-hmm.
when I was 12 years old was when I first heard a calling from the Lord. And it was when my sixth grade geography teacher, Miss Eastberg, showed our class the movie The Ten Commandments, which
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you
Oh yeah,
remember it.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
1956 Charlton
Yes,
Heston,
yes,
which, as you probably remember, it was like 4 hours long, old English, stiff acting, like not something a 12-year-old kid would be interested in.
yes.
Um, and let alone it was also weird that it was being shown going to public school.
In public school, yeah.
But for some mysterious reason, man, I was fascinated by it. And throughout the week of watching that movie, God really grabbed a hold of my heart and just gave me this sense of resolve that this is who I want to be, this is who I am, and I want to follow the Lord. And the thing is that even though I would, of course, like grow into my sense of calling and understanding what that would mean, I really never looked back after that point. That was a pretty defining time for me in my faith.
Hmm.
And when I try to think back on what was it exactly about Moses and his story that like had called out to me, um, I think it was that because I was someone who like had struggled so much with anxiety and just had these insecurities and these fears growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that Heston, you'll remember, he portrayed Moses was it was like he was this strong, wise person, but he was also very gentle and gracious.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like he was almost like a spiritual superhero to me that I looked up to. And it was like I saw the things in him that I did not see in myself, but I wanted to become,
Mm.
which is also why I was saying earlier, like I really do believe the deeper the pain, the deeper the passion.
Mm-hmm.
The deeper my pain of anxiety was growing up, that gave me more of this desire of wanting to know the Lord and wanting to grow out of that by following
Mm-hmm.
Him. But the funny thing is that I bought that DVD and I must have watched it like 25 times that year. My parents will tell you I was just like obsessed.
Yeah.
Probably not the all 4 hours, but in bits and pieces. The funny thing is, though, is that the more that I watched or that I learned about Moses in the Bible and in history, the more I learned that he was actually a lot more like me than I initially realized
Yes.
because he struggled with anxiety. He
Yes.
struggled with insecurity. He struggled
Yeah.
with self-doubt.
Yeah.
And yet what made Moses the great man of God that we know him to be wasn't anything that he was naturally. It's who God formed him to become
Mm-hmm.
as he walked with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Ben, the funny thing that I sometimes will say is that I kind of had like a Jewish spiritual journey to Jesus.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that God really used the story of Moses to lead me to knowing Jesus in a real way. Because the difference is that I did grow up in a Christian household. And my mom is a very strong follower of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Her mom, my Grammy, was a very strong follower of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And they probably had the most influence on my faith growing up. But to be honest with you, I felt like at the earliest stages of my calling,
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I was more connecting with God through the story of Moses. But it would be as I would grow in my faith and was surrounded by just like such solid followers of Jesus that as I grew in my faith throughout my teenage years, Jesus became just more and more central and meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I necessarily like worshiped Moses, but like that was what God used to first call me to follow him.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So, as a person who struggled with panic attacks, anxiety disorder, much later in life, much like double time. So you were 12. Well, you were, what'd you say, 5 or 6 when you started kindergarten. And so you're having that
Yeah.
12. You saw, um, the thing, but so like, sorry, text just came through. I didn't disable the text on my freaking laptop. So a text from my phone just came up and my eyes are reading it. And I'm running on like no sleep. So, but so you see, help me, Charlton Heston. What's the name of the movie?
10 Commandments.
10 Commandments. So you see the 10 Commandments at 12. So as middle age, I would say 2003, so 26. I began to experience a lot of those same things. Panic attacks, anxiety disorder, a lot of those things, and literally relationships, authenticity, vulnerability, God through other believers, through connection. So important in that fight, with mental health and balance, stability. So, I can't imagine like 5 years old, 6 years old working through those things. So, so you said that you watched the 10 Commandments in school, which in and of itself is a minor miracle. I mean, in public school for sure. So you're watching that. You begin to see God work, and Moses really. So yes, he argued his limitations. Yes, he continued to kind of push back. God met him in the middle, right, with Aaron and that. So there's something there, but really and truly, it was obedience. It was that stepping out in faith and being obedient, even into the unknown. Now, this will probably mean more to you or resonate with you better than most people, but I've always thought that Moses kind of got a bad shake, right? So he gets them right to the Jordan and then has to stand on the hill and watch them go in, but he never gets to go in. That's always been interesting to me. I'm not going to say bothered me, but that's always been a little bit interesting to me. So, so 12 years old, you watch this movie. There's this internal move of God, I would believe by the Holy Spirit, that's happening in you. Attempting to discern a call or feel a call on your life at 12, awful young. So then from there, what's next? What steps? Where do you end up? Who does God bring into your life? Like, where does your story go?
Yeah. So it may sound kind of strange, but actually might make sense. Of around the time when I felt called to follow the Lord at 12, I simultaneously also kind of had this sense of I was being called into ministry, because I not only felt this kind of special attraction to the character of Moses, but I also felt this kind of attraction to his shepherding prophetic like role, where kind of as like a funny disclaimer, I was a self-proclaimed calling myself Moses with my friends. It was a running joke with my teammates in middle school. Call it delusions of grandeur or call it just faith. I don't know, but in the sense
maybe
that like that was
maybe just adolescence.
I'll go with that.
Yeah.
Yep. So I say that to show that like, there was already this sense of like kind of identifying with this like ministerial calling and ministerial role. And that continued to grow throughout middle school to where by the time I was going into high school, I could not honestly imagine myself doing anything else. I tried to think of like being a businessman or being a dentist, and praise God for people who have that calling. I just had this deep sense of like, that's not me. Well, something I'm very thankful for is the pastor of our church. His name was Bill Barnes, and he was a really good mentor to me, who
Hmm.
took me under his wing. And he was one of the first people to encourage me in my calling. Um, and I'm also very thankful for him because going into high school and thinking about eventually college, I was a good student and I liked school, but I was not excited about the thought of going to college because in my mind it was, all right, I'm going to go to Florida State University and I'm going to study business,
Hmm.
which for me, I was just like, that doesn't sound exciting to me. But thankfully, Bill Barnes, he had told me about seminary school and told me that he's like, well, you can go to college and you can be trained to become a minister. Um, and so then I started getting excited. And then fast forward from there, throughout high school, was playing lacrosse and looking at some schools to get recruited to hopefully play in college. And I ended up committing to a small Christian school in West Palm Beach, Florida, called
Okay.
Palm Beach Atlantic University,
Hmm.
where not only I'd be able to play college lacrosse, but then I'd also be able to study ministry.
Yeah. Yeah. So your dad was a collegiate football player.
Yep.
You're a collegiate lacrosse player.
Yep.
So you leave home, you move to West Palm Beach to a Christian college to play lacrosse. What
Yep.
was that transition like? I mean, that the allure of freedom. You're out on your own. Who did God bring into your life? How was God proven to be faithful in that season of your life?
Oh, couldn't have been a better question, to be honest with you. Because those 6 years in West Palm were the most formative years of my life,
Wow.
in my opinion. Um, as I shared, I already had a strong sense of calling
Mm-hmm.
and already had a walk with the Lord, but God would do so much refining and healing in my heart during that time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was like the definition of a pruning season for
Mm-hmm.
me. Um, and I do have one story that I wanted to share with you on this.
Yeah.
Kind of a longer story, but it's one of the most important stories in my life. And because honestly, it saved my life. And so I'll try to shorten it, but want to
You
make
don't
sure that's
have to
cool with
shorten
you.
it. Tell it.
Okay. All right. So, so like I mentioned, a lot of healing during that time in West Palm, and a lot of that came out of my experiences with the lacrosse team. So, the spring of my freshman year was one of the hardest periods of my life. Struggled severely with a season of anxiety and depression. It was probably the most intense season that I had since I was a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I remember waking up early in the morning some mornings and my body would be shaking uncontrollably. And
Yeah.
I'd have sweat coming down my forearms, sweat coming down my forehead. My hands would feel like icicles. And it was just a very hard time for me. And a lot of that anxiety was coming from like how I felt about myself as a captain, my performance, my being concerned with like accolades and being an All American, stuff like that, the approval of my coaches and my teammates. And so it was day after day, that was just a very challenging season for me. Well, I ended up making it through that year and actually played pretty well. Um, Coaches were very affirming of me. So, of course, I felt relieved by that. Made it through that summer, and I came down for the fall of my sophomore year, and I thought that everything was fine. And I came down about a week before classes started, and I put my head down on my pillow to take a nap, and I instantly started to have a panic attack. And I remember saying out loud, "You have got to be freaking kidding me.
Mm-hmm.
I am not about to go through this for an entire year again."
Mm-hmm.
And so I was feeling pretty miserable for the next few days. I remember going to church that Sunday and calling my mom afterwards and just being like, I am not in a good place right now. And then for some reason, I felt led to go to church again in the evening, but this time at this church called Providencia, that's right down like walking distance from campus.
Mm-hmm.
And I went in there and kind of pretended like everything was fine, put on a smile, put on a brave face. But then from the beginning of the service until the end, I wept the entire time.
Wow.
I just had reached a breaking point.
Yeah.
And I don't remember a single thing that was said during that service. But the one thing I do remember was that there was this song that was played called Joy in Your Waters. And every time I hear that song, it brings me back to just how hard of a time that was for me.
Yeah.
So that service ends and I kind of pick myself up and I'm thinking like, all right, I guess I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do next. Well, as I'm leaving, I hear this voice call out from behind me and he says, "Hey, your name's Alex, right?" And I turn around and this guy with a really big beard comes running out after me. And he introduces himself as Rob and he asks if I'd be willing to go get breakfast with him later that week. And I agreed to do so because I assumed that we just like get together, exchange pleasantries, and then I'd never see him again.
Yeah.
I even thought that like I tried to get out of it at some point during that week, but nevertheless, we ended up meeting up. We went to First Watch for breakfast that Friday. And it started out about what I expected. He asked me a little bit about my story, and I tell him about how I grew up, my sense of calling into ministry, my struggles with anxiety. Like I was pretty open and honest with him for having just met. So I finished talking, and he just sits there and he looks at me before he asks me a question that I will never forget. He said, "If I were to ask you, who are you? How would you answer that question?"
Hmm.
And it might seem like it's a simple question, but to be honest with you, I did not know how to answer it. So I did what anybody else would have done. I just bounced around it for as long as I could. And I said things like, "I'm a good guy. I'm a leader. I'm a son of God," which all of those things are true, but they didn't really mean anything because I was only saying them since I thought they were the right answers to the question he was asking. And then finally, there was this voice inside me that in hindsight, I know is the Holy Spirit. And he just said, "Alex, just give it up. Just be honest." And so I stopped talking and I said, "You know what, man? I don't know." And he said, "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you today." Apparently, he had helped move me into my dorm my freshman year, but I didn't remember the guy. And he said, "I've seen you in passing maybe once or twice since then, and you just seem absolutely miserable. And I know it's because you don't know who you are." And my heart is like beating out of my chest at this point.
Man,
Like,
I can't imagine.
like he was very firm with me, and I'd never had someone confront me in that way.
Yeah.
But then during that conversation, I started to realize how much of my sense of identity was based on accolades and the approval of other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason why I cared so much about those things is because I was trying to deal with this sense that I'm not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And as I would eventually learn, not necessarily in that visit, but there is never enough that I can do to make myself good enough because it really is a grace from God for me to receive and just rest in.
Mm.
And that conversation with Rob was the beginning of me starting to truly live into that. Like it honestly saved my life because from there, I would start to connect with parts of my own story in a very real and authentic way.
Amen.
And Rob, in his very unconventional way, helped me to start to become more aware of the ways that there can be a difference between what I might think I believe about myself and believe about God versus what I actually believe. And he was helping me to become more honest and aware with myself. And then becoming more aware of the difference between what I might believe versus what God actually says about who he is and who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And as I started to become more aware of these things, Ben, I kid you not, within a month after meeting Rob, I started to notice a difference within myself.
Mm-hmm.
where I started to experience this sense of like an inner rest and an inner strength within my heart through Jesus that I had not had before. And that by no means is to say that everything was fixed within that month,
Sure.
because this would be a journey I'd be on the rest of my time in West Palm, as you can
Yeah.
imagine. Really, the
Yeah.
rest of my life I'll be on. Even right now, God's doing healing. Um, but I do know that there was a change within me shortly after meeting him. And it was because he reminded me of who I truly am, of who I truly am in Christ. And then healing, that was really the beginning of healing from there.
Yeah, but the call there is into authenticity. It's to square up. It's to square up. So few people have the intestinal fortitude to square up to the real. Just yesterday, a friend of mine, we're in a van, we were driving from a distant state, and we were talking about authenticity. And it's unfortunate that in our culture, authenticity is so rare that when people encounter somebody who is transparent, they don't know what to do with it. Platitudes are so normal. Playing the game and if I say this, then you should say that. If I say that, then you should do this. If all of that mumbo jumbo is so subconscious that when we live from our center, from the deepest recesses of us, and when we are vulnerable and strong enough to allow that out, people don't know what to do with it. A big piece of the Simplify work is championing that. To where we have more authentic community, to where we have more relationships where people can sit down and be real. And even if we only move the needle an eighth of an inch, if we can just move the needle. What a gift that Rob A saw you, B was attentive enough and had the spirit of the gift of discernment to be able to see, like, as you were saying that, I'm thinking of a friend of mine here in the community where we live. The very first time that I met him, some people were saying some things about him, and in that moment I was like, that's not him. What they're saying is not him. Like, what the way that I've been introduced to him is, that's not him. And for him to be able to take you to breakfast and then just put it out there, and for you then to have the guts to step into that, because how old were you? 20, 19?
I would have been 19 turning 20 that month.
20 years old, 19 years old. Most young men in that moment sitting across the table, that somebody takes their finger and puts it on the button. They're gonna, every guard's gonna go up. They're gonna turn inward, and they're gonna figure out how to get out of that restaurant as quickly as possible. And then every time in the future that they see a Rob, you're in Walmart, you see Rob down the aisle and he doesn't see you, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's Rob. And then you go a different direction, instead of leaning into those relationships and being like, you know what, this dude, super unconventional, very not normal, stretching and uncomfortable for sure. But people aren't attracted to right; they're attracted to real. It's that authenticity where some of my most favorite people in my life are the ones that challenge me. I can just be in their presence and I'm challenged. I can just watch how they live. They don't even have to say anything. I can just watch how they go about life, the way that they treat their wives, their children, their friends, the way that they just do life. And I'm like, oh man, I got a lot of work to do, you know?
Yeah.
So praise God for Rob. So Rob kind of puts the finger on the button, it sounds like, and in that moment, instead of shying back from that, you lean in. And so from that, I guess you and Rob foster a relationship.
So first off, I got to say it is interesting hear you recognize that I had leaned in, because I think that is really important for us to recognize the moments in ourselves where we chose courage.
Oh yeah.
Emotional vulnerability is one of the things that, at least I could speak for myself, I know for a lot of people, we are most afraid of.
Oh yeah.
And that was a very emotionally vulnerable time for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want you to, I really appreciate you kind of calling that forth from me of what you saw.
Sure.
Like that means a lot to me. So the funny thing about well, the funny thing I think about God is that he knew exactly what he was doing. And of course he does. He had me in exactly the right place where he wanted me at that period of my life. I was very vulnerable, like I said, but he knew exactly what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And Rob was really the lightning rod from God, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
that really was the catalyst for this journey of healing.
Mm-hmm.
Rob and I actually only met a few times after that. Our paths didn't cross a ton, but every time that they did, it was always heart to heart, no BS. It's
Mm-hmm.
like if we're gonna experience the real life of the Lord, if we're gonna experience a really meaningful life, we are
Mm-hmm.
going to be as honest as we can be with each other. And he would
Mm-hmm.
not settle for anything less.
Mm-hmm.
So the role of true healing comes from honesty, is he modeled that right up front for me. But God knew, like, he had surrounded me with exactly the kind of people I needed at that point in my life. Talking about authentic community, I shared with you, like, growing up, I had a really good support system growing up that I'm very
Mm-hmm.
thankful for. But the community that I had in West Palm was very important for me, especially as it related to my faith,
Mm-hmm.
because my faith is so central to who I am, to where I almost can't make sense of myself. I know I can't make sense of myself without Jesus.
Yes.
And growing up, I feel like that was respected by the people around me, but it wasn't really understood or shared by a lot of my friends and the people around me, to where it wasn't until West Palm where I started to meet people who I feel like really got me, like really
Mm-hmm.
saw me in the way that Rob saw me.
Yes.
And that was so, say it again, so central for my healing, to have people who really got me and really saw me. A big part of that was at PBA, especially in the School of Ministry. Like, it wasn't just academics. I'm very thankful for that, because, as you know, seminary can have a lot of academics, and I'm thankful for it, but it can get overwhelming. But I'm thankful for some of the professors I had, where they really knew me and really encouraged me. And then between some of my friends I met in seminary, some friends from the lacrosse team, some people I just met from being around campus, I feel like they were solid friends that just were very real with me, and we were real with each other, and I felt loved and known by them.
Amen, man.
It was such a gift. And then the other big part of that was my church community I was a part of with First Pres, which ironically had planted Providencia, where I had met Rob.
Oh, wow.
They loved me so well there. Some of the mentors in that church were like father figures to me. You met one of them, Suds.
Yeah. Oh, Suds.
And I can't think of the right words to express what he's meant to me. And you've got a glimpse of it.
I would love to hang out with that dude. Like,
Oh, one of a kind.
yeah,
One of a kind. And he, he was actually the one. I never played under him at PBA, but as you heard, he was the one who started the lacrosse program, and he had recruited me to go
yeah,
there. And so we had a relationship pretty early on. Um, but yeah, he has been just like a father figure and a friend to me. Um, the small group that I was a part of, I met some of my best friends there. Four of them were actually in Dani and I's wedding. And I think one of the best parts is I met Dani in that small group when she came and visited from Nashville.
really.
So yeah, man, it was really cool. And I just think, Ben, that was a very challenging season for me when I was in West Palm, and a
Hmm.
long season, 6 years.
Hmm.
But like I said, I so believe that God knew exactly what he was doing.
Hmm.
He knew his hand was on me every step of the way. And one of the main ways I saw that was the authentic friendships and
Hmm.
mentors that he
Hmm.
had put in my life to walk with me during that
Hmm.
time.
Hmm. There's so much as you touch on there, and I'm being extremely intentional not to interrupt you because this is just straight up meat. Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, I got some notes here. So the first thing I want to talk about is ever how many minutes ago I didn't make a note on it, but emotional vulnerability. So what you said there was this idea of emotional vulnerability, and um, in my experience, especially coming from a rodeo background, as I'm sure you can imagine, probably rugby too. I would bet.
Or
Or
lacrosse, yeah,
lacrosse. I mean, sorry, but still,
yeah.
I mean, you're talking about gladiator type. Um, you got to have some guts to play lacrosse. I mean,
Mm,
it's a physical game,
mm,
um, sport. But so in my lived experience, coming out of rodeo, coming into ministry, hunting, fishing, outdoor life, backpacking, camping, just kind of manly, masculine stuff, whatever. One thing that I've seen is emotional vulnerability is probably at an all-time low in men.
mm,
I would argue that men have a more difficult time becoming vulnerable um, than women. And
mm.
part of that is that bend never break. That kind of, it's just that kind of, and I don't think that masculinity and emotional vulnerability have to be mutually exclusive.
Amen.
So I know some men who are chiseled, um, and um, that are real men.
Mm,
But I can sit down with them and we can talk through what's going on in our guts. We can talk through
mm,
what's happening in our hearts. We can talk through what it is God's up to in our lives, what we think maybe God is doing in our lives. And so if you're listening to this, whether in real time or who knows when you may stumble upon this by whatever means necessary. Um, I would argue that to be emotionally vulnerable as a man takes more strength and courage than to not be emotionally vulnerable as a man. It
mm,
takes more guts to put yourself out there. And I'm not talking about sitting in a circle singing Kumbaya. I'm talking about having those accountability people where you can sit down and look across the table over coffee and ask a man, how is it with your soul?
mm.
And they can give you a no BS answer.
Yeah.
This is what's going on. These are the temptations that I'm dealing with. These are the mental games that I'm dealing with. This is the stuff that's keeping me up at night. This is what I feel like the Lord's leading me into. These are my concerns. Just really, not super profound, but guttural conversations. Um, I think that's missing.
Hmm.
The next thing that I've got jotted down here is known and loved. So here's the thing. To be known and loved is a gift. There are people who are known and not loved. There are people who are loved but not really known.
Mm-hmm.
But when we are known and loved, you said that the people there in those 6 years both knew you and loved you. And that's this innate sense. That's this deep sense of coming home.
Yes.
That's that place of arrival where you are both known and loved. And there, and in my experience at least, and those that I travel closest with, journey deepest with, to be known and loved is the greatest gift.
Amen. Amen. That to me, Ben, that's what we were created for.
Mm-hmm.
Like that. And I think when we experience that, which can be rare, but like when we do, that's when we're experiencing the kingdom of God, heaven on earth.
Mm-hmm. And it's two planes, right? So there's the vertical plane, like they talk about all the time, and the horizontal plane. So to be known and loved by God, or to, let me rephrase that, to allow ourselves to be known.
Mm-hmm.
So God's willingness, God's desire to both know us and love us is constant, never changing. Are allowing ourselves to accept and receive and believe the fact that we are both known and loved by God is hard, but it's not, at least for me, it's not as hard as the horizontal plane. So on the vertical plane, you've got, your relationship with God, my relationship with God. On the horizontal plane, we've got our relationships with others, with our brothers and sisters, and those that, so you've got the vertical and the horizontal, which goes back to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, love your neighbor. So there's the vertical and the horizontal. It's enough to get over the hump or the hurdle of the vertical. And right about the time we get that kind of tended to, we come up for air and look around. It's like, oh my gosh, now I've got to do this on the horizontal plane, and a lot of my adult life, a lot of the past, 15 years has been fostering that horizontal. Yes, the vertical is there. Yes, we're teaching and leading and whatever for the vertical. And that's the not yet. But I believe we should focus on the not yet now. I believe we should focus every bit as much on the here and now.
Yeah.
And that's in that horizontal piece. I know that's deep. I know it's a lot. This might be the first episode that I've actually kind of waded off in there with a person, but I think that our work is every bit on this side of the grave, on this side of eternity. I believe that our work is every bit as horizontal.
Yeah.
That's why I'm passionate about authenticity in relationships. That being known and loved.
Yes. What's so beautiful about that is in the story of the Garden of Eden, which, is usually shared at weddings, and you had shared a little bit for ours, of the last line before the fall is that little sentence at the end of chapter 2 where it says Adam and Eve were both naked and they felt no shame.
None.
And I think that idea of being naked with one another, not physically, of course, with marriage, it's true, but the idea where we can be vulnerable with one another and not feel shame about who we are. When we really believe we are being known and loved and held in that space, like you said, by God, but also by one another, I think that is living in paradise. That is living in the Garden of Eden. It's just we're doing it here on earth.
And the vertical part of that is I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's relatively easy.
Yeah.
The horizontal part of that has got to be a two-way street.
Mm.
And everybody's different, but what I have lived and experienced is when you extend the knowing and being loved. So when you give a person the space to allow themselves to be known and you love them,
Yeah.
that has to be a two-way street. It's got to be going and coming. And I don't know what your journey's been like or what your lived experience has been, but more times than not, for me, the knowing and loving has been one directional, because when that's turned back around and then you come to this place where you're like, okay, so I'm going to let you know me. And then you kind of get into that. I don't mean this in a transactional way.
Right.
I just mean it in an authentic kind of communal way. Folks want to be known and be loved, but more times than not, they want to know, but they don't necessarily want to love, or they want to love, but they don't necessarily want to know.
Yeah.
And some of that is time. Some of that is rationing out. Like in my 30s, for sure, I had to learn how to ration out. You know what I'm saying? You don't go from standing on the shore to the deepest of the deeps in a month or two or a year or two. But I think sometimes where the breakdown happens is that knowing and loving is not a two-way street. It's not bi-directional.
Yeah.
I think that happens with people groups as a whole, but I also think it happens in individual relationships. So you talked about refining and healing, and so we've spent a good bit of so good. This is gold. We've spent a good bit of time talking about the healing. What about the refining? Are those two things one and the same? Are they separate? You know, Brennan Manning, who's my favorite, writes about brokenhearted lovers and wounded healers. So Manning argues that, like, from our brokenness, from the anxiety, which is something you and I share, and the panic and those type things, kind of takes one to know one. And so then later in life, maybe you're in a season of health, but you encounter someone who may be experiencing some of those wounds. And so you have eyes to see them. And then you don't feel sorry for them. You experience compassion, splagnissimi, which is this twisting of the gut. It's like this guttural ache, deep down compassion. And it's because you see a glimpse of you in them. It's this wounded lover or a broken-hearted healer. It's like from those wounds, from those breaks, we are able then to love others in a way, in a compassionate way, like the Bible talks about.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the healing that you've experienced and through by, the avenues by which you experience that. What about the refining? Are those two things the same in your experience? Or is refinement and healing, do they partner? Are they separate? Do they cross at times? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think I would say yes, 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 and yes to all of them. More in the sense that, like, for me, the healing was the refining for me. I mean, that was the kind of making me more into a man of integrity. That's where my thoughts and my words and my heart and my actions and relationships with others were all more in alignment. And of course, the challenge with that is that all of us have cracks and ways within our character where we're not in alignment, but that's the pursuit of authenticity. It's
Yes.
the movement towards greater integrity and wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found for me that my the healing that was happening in my soul, which you might have heard, I picked up on a lot of my story, was there was a lot of just themes of shame within my story, a lot of the wanting to be enough and wanting to be good enough for other
Mm-hmm.
people, and how that oftentimes it's that sense of shame that leads me to doing things that are out of alignment with what God calls me to do. But it's
Yeah.
funny that like when the healing of those wounds of not feeling like I'm enough, for like really believing and resting in that I'm loved and I'm accepted by God,
Mm-hmm.
it's funny how my character also naturally follows suit. And so I view the two as they go together. And
Okay.
you almost can't have one without the other.
Yeah. Yeah. So the healing, kind of the original wound, I think. The refinement, um, I don't know if we ever reach a place where we are healed. So I think like my friend Bill Parker, right? So Bill Parker's gone to glory now, but so we can learn a lot from old guys, right? And instead of just putting them in homes, we ought to be mining. I mean, they're gold mines.
Yes.
We should be mining constantly. I mean, there's a reason why the text says that gray in the beard, is a sign of wisdom. They've lived it, they've read it, they've experienced it. So one of my favorite
Mm,
guys, a man named Mr. Bill Parker, and Mr. Bill, I would say the healing part probably, I don't know about complete, but was getting there probably in his 70s.
mm,
But then there was like this decade where there was this continual refining. And he would come into my office. He was a diabetic, and his wife, she's still living, so I should probably be careful. Somebody may be listening to this, but I don't want to get him in trouble. But so Mr. Bill was a diabetic, right? And so and Miss Cynthia was a taskmaster. She'd just wear you out. And so he would go into our secretary's office, the church secretary, and he would get a big handful of Jelly Belly jelly beans, and then he would put them in his coffee so that he could, and he'd come sit in my office and we'd talk. But he had all that sugar in his coffee. But if Cynthia stuck her head in the office to check on him, he's just sitting there drinking black coffee. But there's a big handful of Jelly Belly jelly beans in the bottom. And
mm,
so that's Mr. Bill. But he so much refining
mm,
came out of him, and he, as he shared ages and stages and seasons of his life, and right up to the end,
mm,
what he felt like God was doing in him, what he felt like the Spirit, the new territories and the stretch, like you and I were talking about before we came on
mm.
camera, that refinement. I don't know. I think the healing will run its course as far as the heart.
Yeah.
I don't know if the refinement, that sanctification, that marching on to perfection, it'd be cool to unpack that more, I think.
Yeah.
So 2 times, I've got it underlined 3 times. So I'd have to say, and so far in the episode, you've talked about the importance of small groups 3 times.
Mm,
Okay. And so whether it be in your current context, whether it be in the small groups that you had at the college time, or the different local churches that you were in and around down there,
mm,
do you think that small groups offer an environment that's conducive to authentic relationships?
They can be. Depends on,
Yeah.
it doesn't always work out that way, but I think that it depends on the mentality of the people who are in the group, the
Okay.
willingness.
Okay.
My experience is that, like with the small group that I told you that had such a big impact on me when we were down in West Palm.
Hmm.
Part of why I think that created the environment that it did and why it had the kind of impact on me, and I know it's had on other people, is the fact that people were so willing to be themselves.
Hmm.
And I think that in small groups, sometimes we may think that it's like, oh, people need to be more encouraged to pursue things that are meaningful, or encouraged to talk more about deep things. I've
Hmm.
actually found that a lot of people are starving for that, and they want to have deep conversations. They want to talk about the Lord. They want to talk about what's meaningful in life. But it's just we feel this sense of hesitancy or shame of like, I don't want to be weird.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I loved about the group down in West Palm was that people were just not ashamed of like, this is something we really care about. And so we want to talk about these things. We want to talk about what's going on in our hearts. And they weren't like hyper spiritualizing things, or I mean, I
Yeah.
guess from a
Yeah.
certain
Yeah.
point of view, we can see spirituality in everything. But like they were
Yeah.
also very just real down to earth people who were sharing
Yeah.
themselves, but just kind of accepted like this is something that matters, and
Hmm.
everyone was bought into it. And I think that creates an authentic environment.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. So here in the context where we are now, we're trying to. Last semester we launched small groups, and anytime you introduce something new, you just got to kind of stay the course, until things gain traction. But I do believe that the environment is conducive to authenticity. Um,
Yeah. When I like
it
what you had said, sorry to cut you off, what you had
Go
said
ahead.
earlier of the kind of rationing out of, I think it
Yeah.
also is very relational where like we have to know like where one another are, to where
Yes.
like if we try to go too far or too much and that's not
Yes.
where each other are, well then there's no relationship happening.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then the stiff arm, there's and I sense that in myself. There's times where I sit down with people and they go too far too fast and I'm like, ugh. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And
Yeah.
I'm as I try as hard as I can be to be a bi-directional person, but there's still I think the rationing out, there's definitely something there. So you said through the small group, so through the relationships in the small groups at college, then you met Dani. So I don't want to run out of time because it's too good not to offer that part of your story. So how then do you and Dani Brown cross paths?
So Dani had been living in Nashville for a few years, and our small group down in Florida was led by a husband and wife, Adam and Courtney. And Courtney used to live here in Nashville, and her and Dani were good friends.
Okay.
And the three of them are all teachers, and Dani had come down to visit for spring break. And I had showed up to small group a little bit later that day, and there was an open seat next to her. And I sat down, and small group went as normal, so like didn't think much of it, but we like kind of chatted a little bit afterwards, and it was great. But then when I left, I get a call from Adam, and he's like, "Hey, we're going to Miami tomorrow for the day. Would you want to join us?" And I had like a longer week of work. I was coaching lacrosse at the time. And I was like, "Sure, I've never been to Miami." Little did I know that he was trying to play matchmaker.
Oh.
Um, and so but I wasn't familiar, like aware of this, but we had such a good time with the four of us who went to Miami. And just the thing that I loved about Dani early on was, and
Mhm.
going back to authenticity, she is so comfortable in her own skin,
Oh
and
yeah.
she is so Dani. And
Yeah.
she's also so fun with being who she is, where like we were just like listening to music in the car and 2000s classics and similar sense of humor to where by the end of the day, um, I knew I was interested. Um, but then one of the fun things about this, I think you might remember this story. She was only staying for a couple of days, and she was leaving on that Saturday. And I was hoping to get an opportunity where her and I could have some just like one-on-one time to, you know,
Yeah.
kind of like tie up things and see where we're going.
Yeah.
But it was like a little short group gathering and just didn't get a chance. And so I ended up driving away. And I was like kicking myself when about like 10 seconds into driving away, I get a call from Adam who says, "Hey
About the
man, you left
water
your water
bottle.
bottle." That's it.
Yes.
And I knew I didn't bring my water bottle, but I didn't question it. I was like, any reason to go back, I'm in.
Turn
And
it
so I
around.
came back and Dani comes running out with what's not my water bottle, but it gave us time to connect.
Oh, that's
And the rest was
gold.
history, as they say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man. Yeah, so you all obviously hit it off. You begin to date, but that's long distance. What was that season like? I mean, you're in Florida, she's in Tennessee. The devotion's there, the sincerity's there, the commitment's there. What was that season like for you?
I'd be lying if I said that it was easy and smooth sailing.
Yeah.
There were some times that were harder where it's like, man, we would love to just be in the same place already. But man, talk about God's faithfulness. So we, with kind of like how it had worked out for us, we ended up sharing a Southwest credit card during that time. Um,
Yes.
we were able to go on flights to see each other about once every 3 weeks, which for being like in different states, like that's a tremendous gift that we had.
Yes. Yes.
We got to meet each other's families within like the first several months, and like again, being long distance there in Missouri and Florida, so that was another challenge for us. But like the fact that
Mm-hmm.
that opened up and we got to meet each other's families, which is
Mm-hmm.
so awesome. Um, but man, I will say that we learned a lot about like the importance of just like communicating and like loving each other for who we really are, because
Mm-hmm.
we didn't have a lot of like we're just physically near each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um, where that was kind of cool to see, like we love each other because we actually love each other when communication's all you have. Um, and so that really carried us through, man. And then also another thing was gratitude, because if you're only spending a couple of days together at a time for a few weeks, a lot of what kept us going is just reflecting on how special, no matter how many times we say it over and over, it was always special for us to remember like the little moments together.
You don't take anything for granted.
Definitely.
When you got 2 days together every 3 weeks, every moment of those 2 days, you don't take for granted.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah, that's sweet.
yep.
So you make it through that. Talk about the engagement. Tell the engagement story. That's a good one.
So we went to my best man's wedding on this is like mid-April. Which I don't know if you remember meeting him, but he was the tall guy, Alexander.
Yeah. Yeah, oh
He
yeah.
was, yeah, my best friend from childhood. And so we went to him and his wife Sarah's wedding together. And the next day we were back in Orlando, and my parents were out doing their own thing. And Dani and I had a pretty normal day, a very us day. Like we just relaxed, like had like a devotional time in the morning, and then watched a movie, made some food, like nothing out of the ordinary. And
Mm-hmm.
then we went on the boat for a little cruise, took her out, and then we came back. And then I said, "Hey, would love if we could grab some sandwiches, and I want to take you to a special place for us to eat." And wasn't really giving anything away. But then we went to the dock of our old neighborhood, which is right on the lake, and we get out of the golf cart and Dani walks ahead of me and I'm like trying to put the ring in my pocket. And my mom had warned me, do not lose this ring in the water. And so I tried to like put my finger in it. Um, but we ended up going out to the little gazebo and we were about to eat and I had said like before we eat, and then I brought up kind of like said my proposal and got down on the knee
Yes.
and asked her.
Yes. So sweet. So, what was it like coming to Missouri? You were kind of thrust headlong. Did you come? I know it wasn't cousin camp, but did you come like, weren't you here the first time when all of the like extended Worths and the cousins and I mean, you were thrust. Was it Thanksgiving or was it holidays? What was it when you came here the first time? Was it Thanksgiving?
It was a little before that. I first met them, Dani's family, the beginning of August, and a
Okay.
lot of the family came over. Um, yes,
So I'm getting two things mixed up then. So the first
yeah,
time I met you, you all rode the four-wheeler here to the house.
oh yeah,
And having known Dani and Sarah since they were just little, I'm thinking like, this has got to be a pretty special guy, kind of like and you all roll up and we start visiting. And I'm like, this dude's different. I mean, almost immediate. And the highest compliment I can pay you is you didn't have to, you don't have to try. Like you're never having to try ever. And I talked to Kurt about that even after you all left. I'm like, you know what? That dude doesn't try. He doesn't try to fit in. He doesn't try to say the right thing. He doesn't try to be any kind of way. Like he is completely comfortable in his own skin. Like totally and completely comfortable in who he is and doesn't try to be something he's not. And that is so rare. And as I was talking to Kurt, he was like, no, you're exactly right. I mean, he just walked in, was totally himself. And so that, you left out of there, you left out of here. I came in and told Stace, I was like, chances are they're going to end up married. That dude, so what's married life been like? So you get married, you go on your honeymoon, got to see like posts and stuff from the honeymoon, which looked amazing. Come back, settle into like normal life. Is it buffering? Did you hear that or did it buffer? Yeah, you're good.
I missed actually that first part.
No, that's all right. So I saw posts and stuff from your honeymoon. So you get married, go on your honeymoon, come back, settle in, and kind of normal life then begins to take place. What's married life been like? What's that? Talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I love being married. Kind of the short answer.
Amen.
And I really am in awe of it. And I know it might be easy to say that we're only 4 months married, but like I really do love going back to what we were talking about with the being known and being loved. I have never felt more known and more loved by a person than I have with Dani. And so like just the simplicity of being able to go to sleep in the same bed, live in the same home, have meals together. It's like we really are just doing life together. And I think that's what married life has been like for us. It's funny. Especially being in the months of January and February, like there's not a whole lot we can do outside, or like traveling and stuff. So it's really is like we're doing normal life, but it's just so much better together.
Yeah. So, schooling wise, I mean, you've been through lots and lots of schooling. And so now for the application, you're actually boots on the ground in the hospitals, kind of working your way through. What's that been like? How has that stretched you?
Yeah. Yeah. So with being in, a residency role as a chaplain in the hospital, I also have the educational side. And it is not the normal kind of education like opening up books. It's very much about, you know, vulnerability, emotional vulnerability, self-awareness,
Hmm.
better connecting with parts of my own story, and how that's just not really natural for a lot of us to do.
Oof.
Um, but this is kind of the big part of the refining piece of, because I do believe at this point in my life, God's more concerned with what he's doing in me than what he's doing through me. And
Amen,
I think
man.
that what's happening with this like chaplaincy, I love that I get to serve patients and families and staff, and it is very meaningful. I find a lot of purpose with pastoral care. But dude, with like what God's doing in my life, I think he's continuing to do the things that I shared in my story of
Hmm.
just the healing and the refining of um, becoming more of an honest and authentic person. And then like I found what you were saying earlier of, I love that there's such a diversity in patients that I get
Hmm.
to serve and families with different stories where part of it is like I'm learning from them just as much as, if there's any kind of spiritual care I get to help be there for, it's a
Yeah.
two-way street.
Yeah. That what God's doing in me versus what God's doing through me is solid.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that, but it's not. It is static. That there's seasons where it's what God's doing through us, and there's seasons where it's what God's doing in us, and the in us then brings about the through us that brings about the in
Hmm.
us that brings about the through us. It's like the cycle, there's so much of a relationship with the Lord that's cyclical.
Hmm.
You could tie that into Ecclesiastes 1, but I mean, it's all, there's this cycle where, I've never thought about that. I'd have to really, I like that. I need to make a note actually. In us and through us, if God's working in us, through us, in us, through
Hmm.
us. So, Alex, you've been so generous with your time. You and I could stay. We could visit, man. I'm not sure how many people would stay hooked in the places we would go, but it would be good to me. Um, I will let you go. Thank you so much for your time and generosity. I was sitting here
Hmm.
thinking, like, as you're talking, there's a couple of guys that I would love to almost have like a 3 or 4 way call and have guys on
Hmm.
that are Michael Meeks is one, you and Josiah Key. That would be an incredible episode and getting folks together. But anyhow,
Hmm.
so I end every episode. You had to remind me. You've multiple people always forget it. The name of this
Hmm.
podcast is the Keep It Simple podcast. So, Alex Aken, how do you keep things simple?
Yeah. Because I think my mind would first want to go to like, what are the practices and habits that I or Dani and I are doing to try to
Hmm.
keep life simple?
Hmm.
But to be honest with you, man, I think what hits me at a deeper level is remembering that simplicity goes hand in hand with honesty. That my life is most simple when I am just being who I honestly am.
Hmm.
And being who I honestly am right now in this moment with whatever I have to offer and trusting that that's enough. Um, because I can just get so wrapped up, man, in the games of trying to be what other people expect of me,
Hmm.
to impress, to perform, try to be good enough and to get the approval of other people. And it just can be so exhausting to play those mental games where it just makes life complicated. Um, but I have really found that kind of like what Jesus says, the truth will set you free. I think part of what that means for me is when I really am living in truth, when I'm living in that honesty of who I am before God and before other people,
Hmm.
my life just becomes so much more simple. And I think part of that is recognizing that that's a hard thing for me to do and I don't always do it well.
Mm-hmm.
But even being honest with that, I think just the more that I'm practicing it, like you said, tilting the needle just a little bit, my life is becoming more simple as I do that.
Amen. It's so easy, it's hard. It's so easy, it's hard. It's very difficult to believe that we are the beloved.
Yeah.
And it's in that realization that we are the beloved that we begin to live out of our authentic selves. And then there's freedom and simplicity. It's just like dominoes, you know, man. So awesome. Alex, thank you. Thanks so much. We're going to have you back on. There's a short list here in my notepad. We're going to have to get a couple of guys on, and I have no idea what that looks like. I have no idea what that episode looks like, but I think it would be honoring, and I think it would be a gift. So thank you so much. I know you're busy. I know y'all got a lot going. Thank you for carving out time. I appreciate you, brother, and I love you.
Man, I can't thank you enough for having me on, and just thanks for being a good friend and also somebody that I want to be like when I grow up. Just thank you, and I love you, brother.
Yeah, hey man, I appreciate that. Thank you. Have a good night.